Weekly wrap up.
Hello, Ben.
Hello. Was there a technical glitch there, or was that just me?
No, there was a technical glitch. I lost my internet.
Oh, my God.
I know. It just went, you've lost your internet connection.
Jeez.
Never move the computer once you've gone live on an event.
Quite right.
There we are.
Hi.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess & Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, innovation, and this week we have a guest. We've got Andy Stevenson, who I will introduce shortly, and we'll be talking about some stuff around claims. We've got the claims conference coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and innovation as well. But to kick things off, let's start with the news. Ben, you've got most of the news this week, so let's start with a bit of profit news from Lloyd's.
Yeah, Lloyd's putting out what I will always say are the aggregate statistics of the whole market, even though Lloyd's always claims it as being their performance. But let's quickly brush over that small anomaly. But good news, not unexpected in any way, I don't think at all. But 1.4 billion for the first half, big turnaround, low 92% in terms of the loss ratio. So obviously good rates. So there's a number. Obviously, there's a number of contributors to this. One is the sort of actual lower claims through the COVID period. Rates going up, which is pushing things along, and John Neal has claimed that a lot of this is also to do with the remediation program, as you would expect he would, and he also sticks the boot in. In fact, they're sticking the boot in pretty hard to any loss-making syndicates, almost, but not quite, threatening that they will be kicked out of the market, which is interesting because. My take is this is one article in a moment in time, but in a few years' time, we're probably going to have everybody losing money again. As the industry lurches up and down in its cycle. So I'm not sure that you can keep the story up of constantly, and inevitably, some people have got to lose money, and some people have got to gain. That's how markets work. I think the idea that everybody makes money is a bit of a nonsense, but no doubt they'll say in Lloyd's that is an entirely reasonable thing for a market to expect. But there we are.
Yeah. It's no, it's pretty positive news, isn't it? But yeah, I don't know when we started doing the evening panel discussions all those years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. I remember one of the big topics was: is this the end of the cycle? Are we now seeing a new dynamic in the market? But I don't know if we are. It still just swings from one way to the other.
Well, there is a cycle now. I mean, there is always a cycle. I don't think it's anything like the cycle that it used to be because of the amount of capital that's available in the market. So even now, I think the broker reports are saying this is getting smoothed off, and the carriers are saying no, it needs to raise because they've got to retrieve losses from previous years. So it's when you look at the snapshot figures, it looks pretty positive and rosy, but actually the industry still has quite a long way to go, I think, on its underlying profitability, which is the issue. There's quite an interesting point. The FT,
why is that happening?
I don't know. The FT raises a number of things it's been following through on, which we've been following as well, which is the changes at Lloyd's. Particularly interestingly, because Carnegie Brown obviously raised or put this sort of little tracer out into the marketplace, into the media around the fact of Lloyd's becoming a restaurant, a high-end restaurant, rather than a trading room. And Neil seems to poo-poo this quite a bit at the end of this article. So it says options included setting aside space for events, wellness service, and even a high-end restaurant, which was Carnegie Brown's comment, right? And then Neil says, do I think we'll put a restaurant in the Lloyd's building? I doubt it. Does it cause a bit of excitement? Yeah, and that's a good thing. It gets people talking. We should rule out nothing. All ideas are good ideas at this stage. I can't interpret anything in there other than I wish Carnegie Brown hadn't said we're going to turn ourselves into a restaurant.
Yeah, me neither. That's good. That's good. Ben, are you able to push your mic up a bit? You're just a little bit quiet.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. How's that? Bit better?
Bit more?
Bit more? How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, cool.
Good stuff. Excellent. Right. Let's move things on. So next thing. So let's talk about tanks, Ben. I hadn't seen this, but I'm glad I hadn't actually. It worries me on a number of different levels, but yeah, go ahead.
Right. So what I wanted to do was why I picked this story up is this tank, if anybody doesn't know now, and probably most people don't, is called the Ajax tank. And it was supposed to be the biggest investment in, one of the biggest investments in the future of the British Army. As and anybody that has followed anything to do with the Ministry of Defence and the British Army will know that procurement is not their forte. And I wanted to sort of just put this alongside any things where we might have some issues in the London market, like, for example, PPL failing, or, the issues around the exchange or the bureau, all that sort of thing. And just to put into perspective how bad it really could be. So this program was meant to deliver 550 tanks, these Ajax tanks, which you can see here, which we'll talk about in a second. And actually, so far, it was a 5.5, nearly 6 billion contract. And they have paid out so far £3.5 billion on this. And they have so far received 14 of the 550 tanks. And this program has run into what they call problems. So... so let's just start. So the problems are, first of all, that if anybody goes into this tank, apparently it's so loud, noisy, and rattly that they get nauseous, and they have hearing problems. And it's affecting the electronics, so you can't actually message anybody to say it's loud and noisy and I'm going to throw up. So there was a speculation by the Times columnist this morning, the parliamentary one. He said the trouble is if you have a sort of royal show here, the poor old tank commander is going to be throwing up into the royal royals handbag as they get out of the tank. The other thing is, the other sort of fundamental things is, and you can sort of see this in the picture, it's a pretty flimsy looking tank. I went on holiday. I went to the Tank Museum, which I'd highly recommend, down in Dorset, Bovington, and there are hundreds and hundreds of tanks there, all different. But I know this looks flimsy, right? And you can see, and it is, apparently, it can't take more than a kind of air rifle bullet through the side. It can't protect against it. And look at that gun. That is the most pathetic gun, and apparently it does virtually nothing. So when you look at this,
it does look like it's made out of paper mache, and the gun is it looks like a gear stick from a 1982 Mini Metro.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the idea of this tank apparently was that it would sort of flit around in front of other things and kind of get into battle. But I still don't understand how this could have come about through the procurement process. This was a good idea, because it just seems incredibly daft to me that they'd have tanks that can't withstand shells and can't fire. And the other thing is they can't apparently aim the gun because it's so rattly inside that the gun shakes around when they try and aim the thing. My God, it's incredible. It's incredible. You would have thought now by 2021, tanks were invented, I think, some in the First World War, and they started to be used, in battles like Cambrai and things like that. And there's a huge and interesting history around tanks. So I would have thought that these days, after the Gulf War and all that, we would have had a tank, that could actually work. But no, this is anyway. It's $3.5 billion procurement disaster. The contract's absolutely terrible. They can't get out of it apparently, and they've only had 14 tanks delivered. So there you go.
And I think just looking at it, I think there's a few things I'd say. Firstly, there's going to be no trouble with the parking, because there's so many cameras on it. You must have a dashboard of cameras inside that thing. You should be able to park it anywhere in Asda or whatever, no problem.
Yeah.
But it looks like, when you were a kid and you used to draw like a tank or an aeroplane, and you go, oh yeah, it needs a missile, and oh, it needs a radar, and actually there's a space here. They've just looked and gone, oh look, we need to fill it up, completely fill the thing up with stuff. Yeah. Let's put another camera on here. It looks crazy, doesn't it?
Having looked at a lot of tanks in the last week, I think design passed the tank designers education program by, because I don't think that they always seem to design them in the same way, looking the same. There's never a kind of different, interesting new design, and they don't look they just look pretty similar to the ones that first came out in the First World War, which is, we want a Tesla type of design on this now.
Yeah, I assume it's electric. It's environmentally friendly destruction of death machine.
I don't know if it is, but people can't stand more than about 15 minutes in this without, getting ill.
Wow, amazing. Right, let's move things on. So, last bit of news is anniversary of 9/11 this weekend. Obviously, it's a big story for insurance, because, we're going to talk about London Market Claims Conference coming up, but I know for a fact that is still held out as an example of the London market actually delivering really, really well in the majority of cases.
Yeah.
So it's a big insurance story in itself. Obviously, a disaster and what happened.
Yeah, it is. And I won't talk about that now particularly, but I was in Manhattan on that day, and I was working actually for Lloyd's on their Lloyd's Connect, or Blue Mountain as it started to be called, program. So it was, it's got a lot of significance personally for me, but it's this is a good article actually on the Insurer, where they do pull together some of the themes, I think, for the insurance industry. And there were some very dodgy moments for the insurance industry through 9/11. Many of which are not, I don't think, yet published, but they are. The industry was on the edge and there were fears of a reinsurance spiral and things, but it did in the end. It came through, and that was a positive, and it's been actually a financially positive thing subsequently for the next 10 years for the industry. the insurer rightly, I think, points to some of the issues that were around about wordings as well, because there was this issue of whether there was two policies, related to each tower, whether they were separate, and so on and so forth. So there were many other issues which were slightly more technical, but there was a lot of talk afterwards of fixing that all up, in future, that you'd really get those wordings to be tighter, and therefore not just because they wanted to wriggle out claims, I don't think at all. It was to do with saying we need these things to be solved quickly, and resolved quickly, particularly when these terrible things happen. But the insurer relates then to the COVID situation, which it said has been a poor effort on part of the of the industry, around BI claims and the wordings, and that it hadn't really learned particularly its lessons, and would it learn those going forward? And I would tend to agree. I think we need to. We'll be talking to Andy in a minute about some of this kind of stuff. But this is the moment, and we've said this before. These are the moments the industry needs to shine, and show what it's worth, because they're very public. And it's. I mean, aside from all of that, I think it's a really sad, difficult anniversary, I think, but it's also sort of interesting in the way it's affected all parts of the insurance industry in the world in general, really. And there's a time to take stock, actually.
Yeah. And we'll do that as well in the light of COVID when we talk to Andy. So let's introduce our guest, who is Andy Stevenson. Let's bring him on stage. Here we go. So Andy is a consultant, transformation leader, tech advisor, and formerly director of claims operations at Hiscox. So involved in a lot of the areas that we talk on the show. So firstly, welcome, Andy. Are you okay?
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks. Great to be on with. Is it the Ant and Dec of insurance, or I don't know what you've started yourselves as, but pleasure to join you.
Laurel and Hardy, I always think.
Do you know what, Andy? It is the Ant and Dec, because we've somehow, the technology has moved us to the wrong side today, because Ant and Dec always stand in the same place, so the Ant's always on the left and Dec's on the right. And actually, now I'm a bit confused, because I'm on the left and I'm normally on the right. But yeah, we are.
Good. And yeah, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction there, Andy, but I thought I'd just let you kind of take the stage and just give us a bit of background about kind of your experience in the industry, what you've been doing recently, and then we can just talk a little bit about kind of what's happening in the industry, especially in claims, and then we can move on from there. So yeah.
Yeah, certainly. So thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I, like you gentlemen, been around insurance for a while. Actually started back in the late 90s, where I was fortunate enough to be working with a very inspirational, really, group of people at Direct Line. Was my entry into the world of insurance, where I was a computer coder back in those days. Not that I was particularly good at it, so I found something else to go and do. But yeah, and that's where I sort of launched myself into the industry. More latterly, operating as an independent consultant, which is a very interesting place to be, really, working on large transformation projects down to, advising, as you said in the intro, Jeremy, in InsurTech, which that is a very eye-opening place to be, trying to work with small organizations in an industry that isn't very well adapted to working with small suppliers, really. It understands how to work with other big organizations, but not very well with small ones. I'm sure you both had that experience with what you do.
Yeah. Indeed. So that's great. So yep, as I say, delighted you could come on. So as I said in the intro, we've got our London Market Claims conference coming up. So very much in the thoughts of myself and Ben are claims and the way that claims is evolving, especially after the 2 years that we've just had, where there's been a kind of I think a shift, or at least a starting shift in mindset around all sorts of things to do with insurance. What is the structure of our organizations fit for purpose? Do we have the digital capabilities to meet customer needs? Do we understand what customer expectations and needs are? I just thought, just to kick us off, really, what are you seeing in that space as challenges, firstly, and then also opportunities, hopefully?
Yeah, I think we're to some extent still in the aftermath of, or still involved in, COVID. I'm not sure we've quite got to the place as a market where we are able to quite structure for the future. I'm sure it's in people's thoughts around the impacts and how we deal with that. But I guess there's just so much activity just dealing with, I say the aftermath of COVID, and also what is taking up a lot of share of mind is, working patterns, hybrid working, home working. So I think there's still a lot of concentration on those aspects, and that's perhaps preventing people really thinking to the future enough at the moment. It will come. Those discussions are happening for sure.
Okay.
And I think in there, perhaps just a final point on that, Jeremy, is the opportunity now to really learn, what is the impact on customers? How have people's preferences, concerns, needs, desires changed as a result of, an enormous event? And, Ben was talking there about 9/11, and again, those sorts of world events, putting the human impact to one side, just talking about the insurance industry. Yeah, there's clearly something will change, right, in people's psyche and people's moods or how they operate.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, Andy, I think just from a data perspective, I've been talking, and I would agree with you. We're still in the we're still in the midst of COVID, aren't we? And I think that's the illusion that somehow it's sort of over. I don't think it's over, certainly, psychologically or in terms of the industry. And I think the data would show that. I think if I certainly looking outside of London market, the sort of service volatility, we run an index now in these markets. So if you look at US mid-market in the UK, brokers would be saying, who deal with claims would be saying this, the service is all over the place really. And, that cannot be good for customers ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, no one was ready, of course, to resource what happened. So you can see just.
Just lost.
Just lost you there, Andy.
That's all right. There you go. You're back.
You're back.
I don't know whether you called me. I just responding, Ben. Really, I think that it's difficult to criticize people not being ready for an event the size of the pandemic. I think that would be quite harsh. Although, certainly to a level, people have to have been ready for disaster to strike, and there are operational processes in place to deal with that. I think where perhaps the criticism could come more is around if there's no reaction to that, if there's no reflection or systematic review of how to adapt and change for the future based on what we've seen. I think that's where the opportunity lies. And are we ready for it yet? Are we doing it yet? I don't quite see the signs of it, but I think also on the heels of that has to come a belief that it's important enough to take that on board, to adapt to the future.
So what you're really kind of saying is that organizations and leadership teams really need to understand what customer needs and wants are. Do you feel that that's happening? Do you feel that they got the skills and capabilities on those boards to really focus on that? What's your thought about overcoming that challenge and being close to the customer and really understanding them? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think it's moving the dialogue away from more of the superficial sort of trivialization of customer experience around it being, the classic Amazon 1 to 5 or NPS scores, out of 100. I think customer experience on a product as complicated as insurance has got to be. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be really, people's psyche and their emotions and what they need from a product. And that's quite a sophisticated place to go, and potentially an expensive place to go to really analyze and understand what really drives people's customer experience. So I think, I'm sure there are other industries far more advanced in that area that perhaps insurance could go away and learn from. If it comes back to my point earlier, there's a belief that there's opportunity there and that it matters.
I think, and Ben, you might have some data about this, but it seems to me that I think sometimes those insurance companies just feel that they, especially in the London market, that there is a need for corporations, risk managers to have cover, and we are fulfilling that need rather than we are dealing with human beings on a human and emotional level, and they still have wants and needs and worries and all that kind of thing. It isn't just a matter of ticking a box on you'd say that you've got coverage if something happens. It's a lot deeper than that, and I think in personal lines, sure, you can get that, but I think sometimes that message just hits a brick wall sometimes in London.
Yeah, you're right, Jeremy, because it's often that same person who's your risk manager, as you say, involved in highly complex, expensive insurance transactions, who also is buying cornflakes or buying a car or buying something on Amazon. And of course, their world experience is influenced by how they buy other things and their experience elsewhere. So they click a button on Amazon and a drone posts it through their letterbox 20 minutes later, then that becomes a norm in some ways. And you start to look for that, not quite that exact experience, but you look for facilities of that or functions of that elsewhere. And you start to believe that they're possible.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that my reflections are that there's an element of degrees of separation that happens through the value chain, and I think if I'd say one thing is the industry has never really put the effort in to understand what role or what value each of them delivers in that value chain. I think if anything, it's tended to be a sort of where do we make our money or our commission and how long can we hold on to it, as opposed to, for example, where does our brand as a carrier matter, or where does our brand as a broker matter? It's been a bit of a bun fight. And I think that tends to sort of distract, I think, from the focus that you could get, say, if you're a Coca-Cola or a Unilever, where you're direct to consumer. And as we know in London, many claims adjusters and claims brokers, and then even producing brokers never meet a customer, or they certainly don't meet them often enough to get anything other than a glimpse of what that is, which is a rather strange situation, but it's not necessarily unusual in financial services. I think you might have the same sort of thing in banking as well, where there's a sort of disconnect, if you like. So somehow we have to try and get that back together. The other thing I would just quickly comment on is I think there's also then a kind of what we've got to guard against is a kind of glibness in some of the things that are said. I mean, I've said this about Blueprint and Lloyd's, where there's a sort of here's 50 pages on all the great technology and stuff we're going to do, and then at the end there's a one sentence which says, of course, this will result in a better customer experience. Well, how do you know? And it definitely ain't as simple as that. And perhaps the bit about the customer experience should come first, not this bit about the technology.
Yeah. That's it. Turning on its head. Start with the customer experience. Truly understand what it is and where it matters. Because customer experience is probably hundreds of things, but what are the things that really, really drive it? And what are the remembered things? We've all had a customer experience where it was terrible, but 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, you've actually got over it. And you do go back to that restaurant, actually, because the overall package is fantastic. There were just one or two things that upset you in the moment. And you've got to be, careful of parsing those things out and really getting to the heart of what's really driving that experience. And I think, sorry, just to follow that, is something you were saying then, Ben, about financial services. I think it's around, part of the problem is around the frequency of contact.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have that contact really to understand how your customers are feeling about their experience with you. And actually, most of their customer experience with you is when you're not there. Because when you're selling a product or managing their claim, that could be maybe an hour or so of time over a 2 or 3 year period they're a customer. Well, what happens in the other 99.99% of the time? And that would be really important to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. And you and I have worked together, Andy, on some of this stuff, and we know the difficulties and the complexities. And I think that you in a claims environment and an insurer, you tend to want to keep the brokers happy, and that's really important. But then, does that leave much time for saying, can we interpret what the broker is saying about the customer, or is that even correct? And I think the industry therefore tends, in terms of its messaging and its communication, to be quite poor. And I don't think it's just because it is innately poor. I think it's because it's quite tricky, because you've got to both communicate to brokers in the intermediated parts of the market, which much of the industry is, and then have a kind of almost separate message that sometimes is carried by brokers and sometimes goes direct to the customer themselves, and that's before you even start to, which we could touch on in a second, to work out, well, what's the product itself? It's a bit of a tricky one to sell. It's a grudge, it's a grudge purchase. It's not whatever, it's not the highlight of your day, getting your renewal on your insurance policy. We know that. So how do you make it a cooler product overall, because it isn't very cool in the main, and it looks less cool through COVID, I'd argue.
Yeah, you're right, and you've got to be credible. Just suddenly leaping forward as an insurer and talking about things that aren't in your wheelhouse, you may look a bit silly. Really, you've got to stick to what you know and impress customers that you understand their needs in that space. And you're right, and I don't have the answer to it because it's not in my breeding, but it's got to be out there in terms of really understanding what's important to customers in that space and communicating with them on it. Not guessing.
We've talked,
finding a way to really understand it.
We've talked a bit on here, Andy, about mindset, and big. There's a very good case study about Microsoft and the new chief exec who looked at that as a big bureaucracy and said, we have to change our mindset. We're too inward looking. We have to look outside. We have to become curious. We have to look at what's the best. So what he did, I think, very well was to draw attention to the fact that complacency and almost arrogance really is the enemy of growth and profitability, and actually Microsoft has grown very strong, and I would say I see some of the same traits in insurance. I don't know whether you kind of would agree with that or not.
Yeah, I think if where you're going is around sort of tone from the top, you'll have more insight than I do on this, Ben, but I suspect there are fewer insurers with sort of chief experience officers or somebody with that sort of core objective sitting in an influential place on the board. I suspect that you may have some CEOs and other influential people who have that mindset, but actually having someone who's very much focused on experience and customers, sitting around that top table, I suspect is rarer in the insurance industry than it is, more frequent.
And it looks like, I tend to think that, there are a few people who do genuinely believe in this sort of thing, and they're the same people who believe in having a strong culture, values, service ethos. I think all of those things are the same thing. They're all softer factors, but most of the people, I think, I would say the majority are. That's not how their mindset is. Their mindset is in the spreadsheet and the shareholder returns and the next analyst meeting and the quarterlies and all that. So it feels like, I don't think that's necessarily something I would criticize them for, because I think the industry kind of creates that to some extent. But it does feel like you want to get more of the kind of leadership in. Now, I was going to ask you on that basis, it seems like the FCA, to an extent, the regulators recognize that to some degree and is now sort of trying to force the issue around things like fair value and ESG programs. I don't know if you kind of see that as a way of making change happen.
It can do, yeah, if it's not mechanical, if we're not just meeting a regulatory need, if there's a real wholehearted absorption of it. I think perhaps some of the complexity there, Ben, linking back to your first point, is the type of people, certainly in my experience of working with, specialty insurers in a claims environment, you have vastly, experienced people, hugely talented, but few have come through more of a sort of customer experience,
Yeah.
customer service route into their career, or really been formally, trained or coached in those sorts of facilities. They're very competent, numerically, and understanding the products they're working with and so on. So highly, highly professional people. But customer service doesn't necessarily always, feature of one of those, facilities that you look for people to bring into those roles. And that, unless you have people in leadership roles with that sort of thinking and capability, it's hard for it to really, be developed.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting point, that, because I think that, the history and the work, we've done work on this, obviously, and to some extent, some businesses, and I'd sort of include Hiscox, have kind of led out with claims because it is a very tangible representation of service, and there is a measurable outcome for customers, both financial and in terms of repairing and helping with a bad situation. And I, as you, talk to a lot of people who are kind of talented technically, I suppose, and they're also pretty good on the empathy side of things. They do genuinely believe in the product, and I've seen some who don't, but we know that's changed, I think, quite a bit. But what I think is hard is the connection then to what's the commercial strategy of the organization. Where do I fit? So in a way, they don't know why. If they don't think that this sells the organization, in other words, claims doesn't help this point of sale, or it doesn't help them to sell more or make more money, it's quite hard, isn't it, for claims people to kind of keep up, their belief that it's not just about adjusting the numbers to best effect.
Yeah, I think you're right. If your activity doesn't necessarily directly link to a P&L activity or a balance sheet positive activity, then it's perhaps not going to feature too much in your objectives in terms of what you're looking to achieve, frankly, because that's how, that cascade of what's important comes about. It typically is based on the success of that organization. And if customer experience and service is not seen to be interwoven with that, then it's unlikely to cascade down as these are the sorts of activities you should be undertaking with in your teams. It almost seems a bit, why would I do this then?
Yeah, why would I do it? And then the other one I wanted to ask you about, because obviously you're doing claims transformation and you're seeing more teams now and comparing those teams as I do, but you see probably more of the operational side than I do. But the thing I get from the operational side is people saying, well, we don't have the information, the MI at our fingertips to be able to deliver that service very well. And I've seen, and I've talked about this quite a lot, and not only me, but when you get the technology to do the basics better, to get that MI at the fingertips, in call centers, for example, actually through that, you do get a kind of release of quality, and you can give people more interesting jobs. They're not just fighting the system, as it were. Is that fair? Is that about right? Do you think that's where technology could really help?
Without doubt, making things simpler for your customers or your supply chain or whoever is interacting with you is definitely going to be perceived as an improvement in customer service. I mean, there's probably a whole podcast in there about MI in the insurance industry, so I don't want to dive into that rabbit hole. But I think anything where you can make it easier to do business with people is definitely seen as an improvement in customer service. I mean, isn't that what Amazon stands on, really?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's something tangible, and it makes it it just makes it easy for the customer to be able to do it. I mean, we all buy more stuff off Amazon that we probably don't need because it's so easy. I don't necessarily think that is analogous exactly to the insurance industry, but if it was easier to understand and conceptually the products were simpler with more clear benefits, I think people would the industry would do better, I would say.
Yeah, and perhaps, look, I'm not going to stretch the analogy too far, but perhaps if once you bought your insurance policy, you did get something through your letterbox 20 minutes later, you might feel more complete about the whole process.
Well, we were talking before, and I gave the example of my motor policy by miles, which I will happily promote, because I think they've been very good. They give me and the only tangible thing really is the tracker I put in my car to see how many miles I've done, which was sort of interesting through COVID, because I hardly did anything, and the actual premium was laughable. It was like £2.26, for 6 months or something. It's gone up a bit now, but in a way that's connected me to the product. And also that business is very good at communicating. They do it in a kind of cool, interesting, engaging way. So it doesn't necessarily take root and branch change to make things better in a way. And it's never going to be the sexiest product in the world, insurance, is it? But you kind of have to start with that as being the the situation in what you're selling into. But yeah, I think there could be things and can be things that could be done, but it's a lack of imagination, I suppose, really. Or sometimes structurally, who's going to pay for it? Is the broker going to invest in it? Is the carrier going to invest? All that stuff.
So I think if you can be cool in insurance and authentic with it, you might have cracked it, because I don't see that too often.
I talked with someone the other week. We're thinking about doing, if you remember on Top Gear, the cool wall that they did for the cars. We thought we might do that for insurance, and then we realised actually there would be no one on the right-hand side of it at the moment.
I think my toes have just curled up at the thought, but please, good luck with it.
Fun.
So I just wanted to ask you, Andy, kind of looking from your InsurTech, with your InsurTech hat on, and kind of some of the innovations you might see there. Like, two things. Firstly, that kind of customer focus. Do you see that in these new startups, whether they're technology companies that can come into a certain part of the value chain and help there with? They have a laser focus on that. Are they still flailing around a bit? As we're all part of startups at one point of time at another, and we've all gone through that. And also, where are the innovations that you think will make a difference, perhaps in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think on the first point, I'm not sure it's, again, my limited experience, it's not so much about the product or what it does. I think the real complexity for InsurTechs is that's exactly what they are. Typically small organizations with few people and able to really find opportunities, run the business, make sure there's enough money to eat, and then dealing with large organizations who are not very competent, in my experience, of dealing with small organizations. They just don't understand the dynamics. You go to a large organization for a meeting and they say, yeah, well, it all looks great, we've got a few people to talk to, we'll get back to you in 6 months.
Yeah.
InsurTech's thinking, well, we could do this for you this afternoon if you like.
We
could be up and running. And there's just that the gulf is just enormous in that understanding. I think that for me, I think, is a real problem and holds back innovation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think as well, you've got it's getting worse because the whole procurement procedures, to me, are getting slowing down enormously now. Even not just with insurers, but even with some of the tech companies, in this space where you're taking 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get onboarded. Well, any innovative small entrepreneurial business is going to be dead in the water by the time they've got any cash into the business in that. So it's a really interesting area, actually, that probably, could be another consultancy there, couldn't there, on that basis, Andy? We'll set it up, mate.
Yeah, no, I'm all ears.
Yeah,
and your second point, I think, Jeremy, what's sort of coming up? I think perhaps some of the less sexier areas of insurance are now being looked at. I think a lot of investment was put into policy administration systems, rating algorithms, really enormous sort of corporate-wide systems that could bring huge process improvements. But I think now the eye is turning more to things like customer experience, or making sure you're meeting your regulatory requirements, appropriately managing your supply chains, making sure that you're operationally resilient should there be another large catastrophe such as we've just seen. So I think it's certainly broadening outside the former purview, which is all around process improvement, do things more quickly with less people. I think there's a broader set of offerings now looking to move into those niches that haven't actually necessarily been fully explored by the big systems and big systems integrators previously.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I just to say, Andy, I've been quite struck talking to some of the claims teams through COVID about just how many technologies they're looking at, in all sorts of different areas. And I think as a consultant, I've often come back and said, "My God, you've got too many projects, basically." And they say, "Yeah, I know, but we've kind of got to look at all this stuff." So I think if they do get on with it, you get a sense that actually they are going to settle, in some areas. They're going to start, they're genuinely looking at it and evaluating, and some good people doing it, and they're going to settle on some good solutions. And it may be that is the way forward. Is there's lots of, it's not the big, as you say, the big silver bullet, which we know doesn't work very well in insurance. It is all the small stuff that starts to just, move the needle a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. If only they can find a way to work with the big insurers, it'll all be solved.
You're not the first to say that on this show. I think every single small entrepreneurial business that's been on here has bemoaned that fact. And I feel like we should get a movement together again around that one issue, because if you could just explain to the insurers and find some practical solutions, it would really help. And I honestly don't think things like the Lloyd's Lab and things like that do that sort of thing. I think they just look at the innovation for its own sake, rather than, I would say that most people, as we know, when they come on, you expect them to talk about their the widget or whatever they've invented. They don't. They just talk about the people, their ambition, and how can they work to grow their business. Everybody's trying to do the same thing, right? And as you said, earn a living and be successful. But insurers I don't think they necessarily look at it that way when they're big institutions, because they've never been in that place. Never been in that place.
Yeah. And look, I get it, because I've been more in the purchasing seat than I have been in the selling seat, and I it's been eye-opening to me to recognize how much effort and cost you drive into an organization as a purchaser through your delays and your process and your procrastination because you can't make a decision, and it's a lot of effort and cost go into those organizations that are trying to sell to you.
Yeah. So maybe that's what we'll do at Tintech London Market. We'll have a technology stream which is educating those big insurers on how to deal with insurtechs and make it happen.
Good.
Yeah. Valuable.
Good idea.
Good. Excellent. Right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to say thanks ever so much, Andy, for coming on, sharing your insights and thoughts
Pleasure.
on these topics. And perhaps you can come back as we build up to Tintech London Market, and we'll talk a bit more about technology-driven change and how it's going and how you see things developing. I think it's a fascinating topic. I'm certainly fascinated by it. But
Anytime. Delighted.
Thanks, Andy. Awesome.
Great stuff. See you soon. Bye.
Bye now.
That was good, wasn't it? It's great. It's always great to get a different perspective on these things.
Yeah, and so many topics we could discuss for a lot longer there. Yeah, it's be good. Good idea that about. I definitely think there are some practical solutions on that. Working with smaller providers, and I think we'd have a lot of support for that.
Yeah, I was thinking, because we have the innovation stage at Tintech London Market, where we talk about this stuff. So we might be able to run something new about how to engage insurtechs in an effective way. Stop the waste and the inefficiency in that process. But
I think there's some. I think they have to start to, as they do with triaging on claims, they have to start to say, what sort of supplier are we dealing with? We're not, and are we building the next aircraft carrier, or are we just buying in something that will help us move the boat a bit faster? I've been conscious of that for a long time, really, that's not how they think. It's one size fits all, often. But it's also cultural, and it's getting people on, getting people in decision-making, places, jobs, roles, to be educated, to have a bit of training on it, and say, if you're buying from, massive IT corporation Inc., Microsoft, it's a bit different from buying from, Joe Blogs and Co.'s got the latest widget.
Yeah, definitely. Good. Right, let's move things on. So, Ben, what are you doing this weekend? Well, actually, we were going to talk about Emma Raducanu.
Yeah. Just to say, what a great thing that's been, and it's incredible, because I just want to contrast it with the kind of slightly negative press that she got after where she walked out off court at Wimbledon, and how things have changed. And she's literally walked through this tournament, but hugely talented, and I just think testament to kind of spirit really of people, and the tendency often of the press to either elevate or write people off. But she's been fantastic, so I'll be watching that this weekend at a certain point. And whether she wins or loses, I don't think it matters now. She's been brilliant so far.
Yeah, indeed, it's really good, and from Bromley as well. So give it the Kent
Bromley. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I'm going on a holiday this weekend, Ben. I'm going to Rye, a place that you know well.
I do know that very well. Yes, there's apparently a good museum that I missed there, so look it up.
Okay, will do. Yeah. There's a castle as well I didn't know about until last night.
Castle's good. Yeah, go to Winchelsea nearby. That's very nice too. And and there's a fish and chip shop in the high street, which is called, I think it's called Marco's. That's the one. I went there. Yeah, that's highly recommended.
Great. So that's my weekend sorted.
Thanks, sounds good.
What are you doing?
I'm going to be watching tennis, and then I'm actually down to Eastbourne to see my parents and have a lunch out with me, my old man, on Sunday afternoon. So
great. So Andy was at the seaside in Christchurch. You're going to the seaside Eastbourne, and I'm going to Rye. So
it's good. Yeah,
exiting London.
I might have a swim in the sea, actually.
Yeah.
Last one of the year, I suspect.
I think so. Yeah. Very good. Right. Good to see everybody. Thanks so much. We shall see you next week.
See you, everybody. Bye. Have a good weekend. Bye.